Hi there, video 3. Okay, now I have touched ground with a level of information that kind of in a way easily can be twisted into something else. And we are walking a very, very narrow path here, as I was shown when I was younger. Around the same time, I was having this series of dreams where I saw all of the negative side, of course, within the old Christian version of it. Although I remember another dream I haven't talked about before. I kind of saw myself in a room in a basement, a very tall building for reasons and purposes. And in that basement, it was full of what we call red-skinned devils. And these, I've seen them in cartoons later on, which is interesting, of this whole child cartoonish kind of thing. So there is some kind of joint knowledge of things, or it could be part of the programs, which is why I kind of came up with the ideas of either we could do the Carl Gustav Jung, that we have the collective subconscious, which means we are working with the same archetypes and the same mythology, and yet there are levels of my dream state that kind of defies what Carl Gustav Jung kind of came up with. So that's why I kind of looked into a different approach to it again. But the dream was that it was actually a series of 3 dreams. The first one followed with me being tempted by the devil, as you know, and I kind of did what I had to do and got rid of him. And then, where interestingly enough, let me rewind a little bit. You're kind of saying, well, Randy, why are you putting these dreams out there? Because these dreams have a purpose. It was a kind of a message that was given to me, aside from all of the military project pull in and experiences. I have this series of different types of experiences that put together makes complete sense to me today. But as a child, of course, were part of a pattern where I had bleed-throughs to try and get me to understand something. And these what we call subconscious material, portraying devils and demons and these kind of evil forces were, when I was a child, the only type of what most of us knew of in Denmark, so to speak, of what we could call evil forces. So hence my subconscious, of course, tapped into these collective memories and yet gave it some kind of twist that were in terms of where would a child dream of that kind of thing, right? Which were the version of the devil that I kind of saw as the one you see in the tarot cards as well, even with the pentagram reversed on the forehead. And we didn't have that kind of books in my home. I didn't have that information. So where did it come from? And we didn't have cartoons. We didn't have television when I grew up. It was just after 6 o'clock. Then you had the children's TV show that were for children, not as it is today. Today it's hardcore information level that's being given to these kids. I just watched We Can Be Heroes again on Netflix for children, where aliens with weird tentacle, like squid arms coming out of the back, which is kind of, that's where the aliens in humans with these squid arms coming out of their back. And I've seen these hydras in children in Australia. I'm just kind of, what? Kind of what's going on? And then these super hero kids, these enhanced kids, were the next generation that was supposed to help the aliens by making our planet a better place because it was important for the galaxy. Very, very interesting. These are just kind of where it gets a twist, but it's very close to the truth. Again, this manipulation that's going on so that kids want to be superheroes and help the aliens with these tentacle arms coming out of their back, out of their spine. And I saw some of these kids that are part of the military project. So these are some of the incorporated types of Syrian A types of squid humans that actually are there. So it's amazing what is being produced now, which is giving us so much subconscious information so we barely can see what is the truth from fantasy. But I grew up as a kid with very little knowledge of these kind of things. So when I had that dream of the devil that were enormously tall, 2 meters tall, with horns and with goat legs, and a human male torso and this kind of weird sheepishly type of face with beard and these kind of things. And the whole scenario of me standing there in my white gown as in kind of this dress up as an innocent and being this whole kind of, do you want to follow me? Faustian deal, temptation. I'll give you power. I'll give you money. I'll give you everything you will ever desire, as we know from later movies. As kind of, I got that as a dream as a 11-year-old. We didn't have movies at the time, especially not in Denmark, that were portraying that kind of things. So that's where you kind of get, okay, we are having forces on this planet that traditionally are ascribed to the devil, as in this Faustian deal that if you want money, desire, power, you team up with the devil, and the devil will have, of course, a contract on you, and because you said yes, and then he will give you these kind of things, which we're seeing with some of the elites that are doing these satanic rituals, right? That's that contract we're talking about. And then the whole kind of, yeah, you're part of technically a bloodline that long time ago had kind of said yes for this. Will you as well join your ancestry and your forefathers and what have you, showing that line of it was actually my maternal lineage. And I kind of looked at that and I said, I went into this, how do I, in my dream state, I was thinking, how do I deal with this? Because I knew I didn't want the power, I didn't want the desire, I didn't want the whole money shebang kind of thing. I knew that was not for me, not even as a kid. I never had these dreams of, oh yeah, when I grow up, I want to be a multi-billionaire, right? I never had that kind of desire. It's not part of me. I'm okay with humble surroundings, probably because of my past life as a Buddhist monk. It's okay. This is one of the ways you skate through being a chaos pilot in this world, that you kind of understand being humble, as we know from the Gospels as well, is one of the tricks to defy some of these are actually cute programs that runs for desire, wealth, money, wrongful use of energy, wrongful use of power, principle 8 and 9, which is where you have the dark mastery. They are running these two principles in a complete polarized or reversed version. So that's kind of where you get that one. You want to go with that type of power that is, and the devil is in that dream state, the magnetizing force of raw sexual energy that kind of goes with the physical energy of the form. So that dream taught me a lot. The whole kind of physical energy, physical desire, physical power, wrongful use of energy, wrongful use of power, as in a contract that evolves on this planet. It goes back into lineages, and it goes into this kind of different worshipping, as in kind of, I am your master. Do you want to join your lineage? And that's very interesting, because I'm pretty sure this is going on within the bloodlines as well, whether they know of it or not. Some of them are still in knowledge of this. You have heard about these dark rituals and all those kind of things. Not that I wanted to go down that path, but it is important that you kind of understand that this is those of us who do have some kind of role to play. We have gone through some pretty serious temptations and some pretty serious challenges, which as I in my dream was dealing with that kind of thing and just kind of were repelled by it. And I knew I had to play a trick here. I had to pretend as if I wanted to. So therefore, I kind of pretended to the devil as oh yeah, I want to follow you kind of thing. And that would be sealed with a kiss on each side of the cheek, or by giving the hands. And I was trying to give my right hand as a kind of shaking the right hand. And then he said, don't you know we devils, in plural, which I always found very interesting. That's one of the things in a dream where you're kind of saying, mythology tells us there's only one devil, right? But here in my dream, I got we devils, which kind of goes into a whole legion, which we know from the older material that there are a hierarchy of them, and they are positioned, I think it's the 10th plane of the underworld, that technically we have that sort of devils there. Anyways, that are doing the contracts. Just, I'm not on top of my head where I know that from. I don't know. It just came to me. Anyways, so point being, I was pretending as if I couldn't shake his hand, and he said, don't you know we devils have claws for hands, so you can't shake hands, so that's what you humans do. No, you have to give me the kiss on both of my cheeks. And I thought, okay, I'll give you the Judas kiss. I'll pretend to kiss you, and then I will do the interesting enough, I don't know where I got it from, but I thought as in that dream, I must do that ritual that shies away demons, as in kind of reciting their fathers in heaven. And I did that in my dream, and that made him turn into fire, as in kind of, I'm aligning myself with the forces of Christ, and you have no place in my life, and I'm not taking your offer. It was all mythology. It fits into the book of whatever's going on there. But that was my dream, and he burned up, and he got seriously pissed. I'm telling you, that was more scary than everything else. The wrath of the devil, right? That was seriously disturbing. And at the same time, a couple of nights later, this is when you have archetypical dreams, as it's said in psychology. They typically comes in the series of 3. There is something about the number 3 in this system, right? That's the third cycle, Trinity forces. So the second dream was me being in that basement, in that tall building, interesting enough, a sort of tower, but in the basement were these red-skinned devils, like kind of, I don't know if there is no creatures that resembles them, but they were a kind of upright cows, a type of Minotaurians, but they were red-skinned. And which is interesting when I saw the movie, what is it called? Oh, the Golden Army, where you kind of have that red-skinned devil thingy. That was kind of the ones I saw in the basement, interestingly enough. And Golden Army came later on. So this is again interesting with what I saw as a kid, before it was even made into movies, before it was even in cartoons or anything. And I just kind of saw it in my dreams, right? So anyway, so I was in this basement. I was playing chess, and I knew I was among enemies. And I knew I was there as a kind of spy, and I knew I didn't belong there, but I was playing chess. They knew who I was. I knew who they were, but we were still playing a game of chess, which is again a symbolic representation of what's going on with the evil forces, because they play games. That's how they get in power. They want to play games. They want to tease you. They want to tempt you. They want to pull you into different directions. And then the trickster move is what they have up their sleeves all the time. So just to put that, this is what you're up against. And then I had the last one where I kind of saw things that the dice were rolling down a hill, and I got this little weird sub-demon thingy telling me everything is going worse, everything is going to hell, the world is going to fall apart, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, and then this kind of laughter, right? So wake up from that series of dreams, right? Kind of what? And you're just thinking, how am I going to deal with that? And then I can't remember it was before or after I got this Celtic dream where the wise man was standing in between two paths, this forked road that was dividing into forks, left and right, and he was standing in the middle, and he told this wise man with a great beard and the staff and the whole Celtic druid thing, telling me that I had to choose one of these paths, and I had to look for something that had no name, that had no understanding, that could not be described, that could not be put into words, but that would be the solution for the path that I had to take. And that is, of course, the middle path. You have to go in between the left and the right if you really want to conquer what's going on in this system. So sometimes we have to look to the left to understand what we're dealing with, and other times we'll look to the right. And this is where you kind of need to be, I think that kind of you have to have this kind of skewed or cunning understanding of how to deal with things, not always just play by the book or the right side of things. You can do that. A lot of the gurus and the teachers on our planet have chosen to do so, ignoring the left-hand path because they have not been capable of dealing with the forces there. And most succumb to the evil once they encounter it. But that series of dreams told me that I was able to, one, get rid of the devil and temptation because that's not really in me. And no matter that I was born into the bloodline, it's not for me, not who I was. Second dream, I was playing a game with these guys. They knew who I was. I knew who they were. And I was able to win that chessboard kind of game scenario without technically come to harm. So there are some stuff going on there, which I will explain a little bit later. And then the whole understanding of getting the intel of the world there was technically falling apart. And then let's just do that the druid came after or before, it doesn't really matter, but that's part of the context. That was the left side, and then the right side was the druid telling me that to conquer these things, you must put the oppositions together in the middle path, as we know from the Buddhist teachings, transform them and reunite them and lift them to their highest potentials. That's the way you get through this. And the highest potentials have no word, because you might describe it on the left hand, which is the frequency, and you might understand the right path, that is the original humans. But the only way to get through this is to understand both sides of the game and learn to deal with this in that very, very narrow middle path, which very few are capable of doing. And I was always very confused about it, because how was I supposed to do that? And I would actually say that in that manner, Alice A. Bailey came as a little bit of a rescue, because there's this little group, as always, as we know, there are these scientist warriors, I will call them that has always been walking in between the lines of good and evil to try and solve the issue. And if we lift it above the good and evil and go in and say the original consciousness potentials versus the infected ones, then we can push it out of the whole mythology, good and evil, Christian belief system, religious belief system, because the Hindus have it as well. And the Sumerians had it, and whoever. So it doesn't matter. It's part of religion to do these kind of mythological forces. So let us lift it up a little bit higher and say we're here dealing with types of original genetics of civilizations that, due to the timeline event, got infected and reverted and were imbued with dysfunctional technology of the third cycle, and by that begin to show signs of something that was not supposed to be here. So that is where the original positive side began to show signs of what we call consciousness infection, that were changing them into what we now know as the dark ones. So that's what we're dealing with here. And however the signs have been shown, those of us who took on to us to try and fight the infection and come up with solutions, which you also know from the whole perception logs, including the point in time where we realized that the original density 1 reality field were folding. And I recall that time. That was before the enclosure that came up later on. The enclosure was created for the infectious ones, a kind of quarantine zone, by one of my group or team members from the Syrian workstations that I was not particularly close to, but we kind of came from the same lineage or same group of origins higher up in the galactic order. Let's just put it that way. So that came later on as an attempt to try and solve via the different restoration program, the holographic teaching system, these people inside the quarantine, teaching them how to get their infected genetics undone and return to the original progressive ways. And that's what I've put into the whole transition science classes, doing these teachings of what you people that have the infected or regressed genetics are technically supposed to do. And it still, of course, does not really come through into its correct level of understanding, because it has to be filtered through the frequency-oriented brain. But going into the whole, when we discovered that the original density 1 reality field, as it were, it's an outpost. Our system is an outpost. It's not natural to have systems in density 1, what we call terrestrial systems. These are workstations, and they are outposts, and they are engineered for specific purposes that came after the timeline event. Before the timeline event, density 1 settings, as we know of them, were not even possible. So that's part of what we could say the outer domain, a version of or a portion of the outer domain that were recalibrated into holding time after timeline event energies, which allowed for the different new types of crystallization as well as the infectious state. So we can kind of begin to put that in together and say, okay, so that level of the outer domain that got very close to the abyss, which are the remnant energies of the third cycle, these new interim realities that arose after the timeline event could be used to slow down the infection and create a kind of barrier and also be the same place where we could restore the infected genetics, because if they would then fail, they would be sucked out through the gate system into the third cycle and there be evaporated as it was supposed to. Later on, unfortunately, due to dysfunctional features, quite a lot got sucked out but never got evaporated. So we actually have some of the original humans floating around in deep space, as it's called, in the abyss, and these are some of the ones, once they get sucked back in, they have not it has not been good for them to float around in these dark, malicious type of energies for so long. They have become some of the creatures that nobody really wants to encounter, just to put it that way, but they will come back. They are coming back. They are being drawn in. Okay. So, and that's one of the points of creating all of that malicious energy in our system, so that there is this battle going on right now where we're kind of saying, well, there is the forces that want to open up all the gate systems to the abyss and draw everything in that's there. You've seen it in sci-fi movies. It's been all over the place. The whole kind of whatever's going on is always about opening portals to the lost worlds, right? The dark worlds, whatever, and then let in what is there. And that's it's not taking out of nothing. There is a reason for it. And then there is the other one that's trying to get us to open the gate systems to the progressive worlds and get us back into what we call the true understandings of what we actually are. And that's the left and right hand path, the ones on different scales of the left hand path that are working to a more severe degree than others. Others are just interested in the power, the wealth, and what have you, whereas others are going full length and want these old masters to resume their position inside our reality. Some of them also dating back to Atlantis. There was some kind of huge, due to the Taurus technology, and some of the Orion Wars was sucked out and into deep space, and I have been there for quite some time. I know it sounds like a comic book here, as a kind of a cartoon or some kind of TV show or something, but it's not. I'm just outlining here so you kind of understand when we talk about the war on consciousness, what is it actually? And that is what it is. And that's also part of being a chaos pilot, to understand that not only are we navigating through as a reality that's kind of falling apart, but we are also part of some pretty extreme forces that goes very, very far back. And some will never encounter these because they're not chaos pilots. They just want to go the safe way of doing things. They are doing what technically called the fourth ray, where they're always creating harmony out of everything. You know, the monks that are sitting in meditation and trying to meditate things away by keeping the light around them so that they will spread the light to the world, and hopefully they'll counter the negative forces by creating more light than negativity. Unfortunately, quite a lot of these monks are no longer there. We also had the interdimensionals that were working with that under the Old World Order program. So we had these, they were called the Buddhists of activity. They were the ones that kept the barrier up. There are both the technology and the cubes, but there were also the monks within the different communities around the planet that were grounding that type of energy to keep the balance and keep the abyss at bay. So that's also part of, again, sounds like a movie, doesn't it? But it isn't. But going back to when we realized that the original density one reality outer domain setting were beginning to collapse, and that would allow these dark forces to come into our world and this reality. And that could be the argument, I talked about this in the perception logs, how this colleague of mine went to the councils, and why he was allowed to create the enclosure, the spheres within spheres, and creating that which is now the world that we are part of, and why he was allowed to put the different people that had an infectious rate into there. We could see it in the context of, well, perhaps there was an attempt to try and isolate the ones that had a more severe level of infection, and then later on a lot of other stuff were added in. That is also a way to look at it. There are many different experiments that's been going on here later on, including that we don't really have the linear time span that science wants us to believe, because when you're outside the enclosure, you can enter any nodal point inside the construction, and by that access different timelines from where you can interfere with reality as it is. So we don't really have historical time as we understand it. So going into that understanding that the original reality field were crumbling, that's a memory. That's one of what we call the strongest activation memories I got aside from dreams. That's another one. I remember the whole understanding that the density 1, the outer domain, the outpost were falling, and that the falling here means that they were beginning to get glitches in the barrier of the plasma crystals that held the abyss at bay. Again, I know it sounds like a science fiction movie, but this is how it is. There is a reason why these movies have been made. And with that, that's, as I talk about in the whole philosophy book and other places, that's where that group took off, left of the 6-dimensional, pulled out of our system, and then moved into what we call the 6th dimension of our system, and probably moved beyond a long time ago, further into, I think they took the route out via the Pleiadian system and further into some of the outskirts of the progressive worlds. Because they were that version of them that took off were technically engineered for the LPU, and therefore they were not able to go fully back into the progressive worlds. But that was not the point either, because there's a barrier between the progressive worlds and us that kind of goes with the differences in our progression rate and our differences in our consciousness units and the energy systems that we are having, as well as the organic forms that we have chosen to play out and transform the different types of energies of the LPU. So they were still on the highest level there. I don't think I have not seen much left of them, but the technology is still there and it still runs the new grand cycle. So that's what they took off to do. And then there was a group of us that were left behind trying to figure out how to solve this. And I recall going to an adjacent system where I continued some experimentation. I did that on my own. So I was kind of this lone rider already back then. It's kind of been my MO not to really align myself a lot with people, but always keeping myself a little bit. Yes, I can go in and work in teams, but I'm not team oriented per se. I am definitely working with people when I am in the team, but most of the time I'm doing it in my own way, because I'm working with these energies in a different way, as you know from the whole perception logs. The way that it was approached, I disagreed, and therefore I took a different path. So I chose the path of separation, which, if you read the Bailey material, is one of the flaws of the first ray as well as the fifth ray. That's kind of what leads to the dark ones when they choose the path of separation. But this is, again, depending on how strong are your energies. And that's where we need to not delude ourselves. Seriously, that's the very, very difficult path when we go into the fifth cycle. That is where we are beginning to feel a little bit godlike and omnipotent, because we are mastering energies in different ways. And we know the challenges of the fifth cycle is what led to the fall of Atlantis. And we have that in us. So we must never become too cocky, never become too self-conscious and reliant in that way. We must always check ourselves up against reality, up against the principles and the rules and of the laws of the reality field we are part of, even though it's very difficult inside the enclosure, because we don't have the instant karma, so to speak. So we don't really know what's going on. So the only thing we can really test is the level of residual energies that we are creating. That means the more we are using the energies in a wrongful way, we will create more distortion. But you see, the problem is here that the way humans have become, our physical form as it is creating distortion in itself. So that's part of where we need to learn to be able to see our energy system and see what's going on and understand these fluctuations of what we call power strikes or streaks, because it's both a strike and a streak. And if we are truly within our own power, or if it's an entity or some sort of possessing entity or a dark one that has entered into our fields, and by that gives us this sense of being strong and powerful and have all of these different traits, including if we are around those of us who have the ability to imprint, we will take a little bit of the energy of whoever and whatever we not take as in taking seeing it, but we will get an imprint of whatever we're in contact with. And that will then activate certain levels in our energy system, which will then activate certain levels of genetics, which will then spark to life a series of different types of forces, which will then create electrochemical reactions into our physical form. So that's also some of the things that we need to learn to navigate through as a chaos pilot. And that was some of the things I stayed behind, because I could have taken it off with the other ones, which would have been the logical solution. But due to my experiences from the previous cycles and being part of the galactic wars, and that's why I call myself a warrior scientist. I used to be a warrior, and I chose to become a scientist to solve the issues of the timeline event. I had this very weird capacity to withstand these enormously reverse type of energies. I can get short-term affected by them, which I know when I do, because I know myself enough to know, now I'm not myself. I'm getting weird electrochemical responses and reactions, which I don't have normally, similarly as when I encountered the devil. I just kind of know who I am and what I am without knowing who I am and what I am. I can't explain it, but I know what's my right version. So I always keep it up against that. And that comes into sometimes when I go into a bold move that goes in and play the game, the chess game with these dark forces, then I play on their side until I get the information I need. And then I kind of pull out. And that, I think that's why they have re-engineered me into becoming a releaser. Because if you ask me, would I work as a releaser, as an original profession within the original LPU as part of the workstations? Absolutely not. But this is just, I'm not accepting it per se, but I'm not fighting it either, because that's part of my re-engineering. And it's just, you need to take the battles that you can kind of deal with and seen in the bigger picture, perhaps, that will give me a level of information, which I'm always a little bit kind of, is it actually been put onto me? So I kind of get the information that I need, because who holds the true knowledge of the original worlds today? Humans? Nah. The meditating monks? Few of them, the old teachers are gone. They are really not there anymore. So no, not really. So who does? The left hand. The other side. They know what's going on, and they are playing this, and they want certain groups of humans to activate enough so they can see this and understand this, so they have a polarity to play with when we go into the fifth cycle. That's also triggery, and that's also part of the activation that's going on. So we are having all of these very different levels of what's going on that makes it a very, very complicated game when we're talking about what's the right path and what's the wrong path, what's the right way and what's the wrong way, what are the values of what we're doing. And if we just go with whatever we're seeing, and just that message from the Arcturians that Mary Rodwell referred to as one of the humans that were part of Atlantis, and what she got of information, which were, and interesting, it started with "we bailed," and it was never really explained what that meant. Anyways, but it all comes down to what they say with the whole namaste and we're your parents and we love you and you're cared for and all this, is that humans will only survive this if they work together. And that's the tone that is also in the Bailey books, the Sirian version of this, that we need to work together. But when we talk about the Sirian and the ways they, including with the planetary hierarchy and the lunar laws that they have worked alongside with, I know that's the fourth ray, the whole kind of we need to work together as teams, and it goes with the original version of ourselves. But what is our understanding of teams? And if we take the human version of it, and that's the whole movie with when we can be heroes with the kids, that their grown-up superhero parents don't know how to work together, and therefore they are not able to fight off the alien attack. And we know there's a strength in numbers. And then we have the kids that are also bickering and fighting each other, and then they learn to work together, but under one leader. Again, this hierarchical structure where you have the leader that leads by example, and the others follow the orders when the leader takes charge. and defines how this is going to be. And interestingly enough, the one that does this is actually one that is a human version, a child. She has a superhuman father, but a normal human mother. And she cannot in any ways or forms perform any forms of superpowers, but her superpower is that she can lead, she can create this group of people and make them do specific things because she has the skills to lead. So the question is that true? We must also question that, even though it sounds very nice in theory, and technically you're right, you're having that when you go into war, you have the general that leads the soldiers and tells them what to do. That's the typical, what we call Altarian or the Hyksos lineages and their warring mentality and lineage and how they're doing. That's how all of these tribal warring castes, people or aliens or whatever have done it all times. That's how it works with the Draco races. They are also militaristic in their ways of dealing with stuff. So it's all about, you have the top of the hierarchy that structures and leads everybody else into battle. And by the correct way of working together, you will overcome the enemy. Not that I am to go into Chinese philosophy about know your enemy and know how they fight, so you know what their weaknesses are and all that. There's a specific kind of battle quote that is often referred to, which I don't agree on because this is, again, Chinese. Okay, so this process that we're having here is the debate of what's right and what's wrong, and we don't know. Seriously, I think that is the ability to be humble, is to question everything and not rely on our skills and our superhuman strength. And now we have mastered energy, so therefore we know so much, because the rightful use of energy and the rightful use of power in the 8th and the 9th principle are very tricky, because it goes with the 5th cycle, it goes with the top layers of our interdimensional, and I'm here talking intra-dimensional as part of our energy system that links up to our template. And what if that level of our template is highly infected? Then when it descends, we will have thought that we have gone through the first 7 principles, and there we were doing it in the right way, so to speak. We got through the correct partnerships, understanding that one, and we went into the correct commitment, and we understood that one, and we understood when to be in solitude and when to be loners that are working on our own. We learned when to be separatistic, because we're using segregation as a dynamic force, and we have learned when to go together and work as teams, because that is what was the right approach right there, so we could support each other's strengths. But this is kind of where, do we really need a leader for that? That's just me putting that one in. Do we really need a leader for that? Shouldn't we not be able to all see the pattern that we're part of, the whatever's in front of us, and then as a team work with our individuality as a team effort? And that's kind of mostly almost like without communication. That's some of the things that are going with the hive mind. You have all of these different units that are going together as a unity when they need to team up with the strength in numbers. So this is, again, just putting a lot of thoughts out there, so we kind of understand that in this, as a chaos pilot, there are no clear answers. There are no clear, this is the right way to do. Sometimes we have to work with levels of reality that every fiber in our body tells us this is dangerous, this is dark energy, this will have ramifications if you don't know how to deal with this, if you don't know how to transmute it. And then there are other groups on our planet that are that's why the Bela material have the different race and the different personality structures that goes with the different race, which probably was part of the old world order. And these rays and the different personalities had their plus side and their negative side. And this is not about just working with the shadow features of who and what you are. It's actually working with the complete polarity of some of your strengths. They can have an extremely negative side to them, as in when you take the balancing principle and you're kind of saying, well, I can use the segregation dynamics to separate myself from something unwarranted I don't want to be in contact with. How do I do that correctly? Within our human worlds, we use anger. or aggression, which is not always the right approach, but that's how that separation energy comes in, except that anger and aggression has a tendency to really cause harm to the other person, that's a receiver at the other end. So therefore, that's not the right segregation dynamic. So what is the right segregation dynamic? Well, it depends on what creature you're dealing with. Sometimes it's slander, which is kind of, that's not a very nice way to go around these kind of things. No, but sometimes you need to provoke the other one so that it will appear as it truly is. And that sounds like some kind of movie as well, where you are having some sort of exorcist, one that is, what is it called? Constantine. That's with Keanu Reeves. That's one of my favorite movies, because he's really that kind of. It's a cliche, but he's a releaser. He's an exorcist, but he's doing it in a really nasty way, and he's been smoking too much and he's almost killing himself in it. And the reason why I kind of enjoy that is because when you deal with some of these lower level demons and some of these lower level forms, they are so screwed up. And they are so negative that the only way you can use the balancing principle is literally to go to that type of energy they have, and then don't get yourself lost in it. It will not work to go in and being light with these creatures, because you will then just vibrate away from that level of reality. So sometimes you have to become what you're fighting, but without losing yourself in it. And that's part of some of the work that a releaser does, and that's why I like the movie with Constantine, which I actually know, in fact, as a matter of fact, sorry, I was saying Danish word there, probably is a comic book. I never read it, I never encountered it, I just watched the movie. But that's also, there are some very interesting things in that movie as well. So we have a lot of information. But since people are mostly not acquainted with this and are just seeing as part of the fantasy realm, and it's packed into all sorts of weird cliches, then you're not really catching the information, especially because most people don't have that level of information. So you need to know what is true and what's fiction when you watch these movies that are giving that information. But they're, of course, been put out there so that those who actually do have these capacities, because there used to be more of us, as we see with the Warrior Nun TV show and these kind of things. There used to be more that were fighting off evil, both inside this program or the enclosure, as well as the interdimensionals that were keeping up the barrier to the abyss and onward and so forth. And all of these have been taken out one by one over the course of time. And people that have that original skills and are seeing these creatures, they are now dreading them and thinking that they are, there's something really wrong with them. Some of them are in our, what we call asylums, and have gone completely insane because they don't know what they are. They're reborn with these skills without knowing what they actually are. And that is the ones that are fighters of evil, which we also know from some kind of TV show, movie, or what have you. So that's also part of it, because I've just focused a lot on the whole alien agenda, which is where I want to go. But I want to touch ground with this as well when we talk about that is out there as well and has been part of our human history. And when we go into a scientific level of it, we understand that some of the first souls of high level infection were put into this human form as a part of an experimentation to try and see if they could encapsulate this in that human form so it wouldn't spread to others, and then at the same time work through different types of technologies to try and restore their genetics, different types of holographic teaching system, which has now been in the Balaam material, the path of initiation and onward and so forth, which were administered by some of the groups that later became the planetary hierarchy when they were taken over by the Draco races and our system was hijacked. So there is a scientific, logical, higher order, advanced civilization answer to everything that's going on, including what has later on been seen as mythological characters. They are part of some early hybrid experiments that were going on, etc., etc. So that is kind of where we need to take everything out of mythology and look at it and say, yeah, that's distortion. No, these are actually what we call a later interpretation from a lesser developed mind of some advanced civilizations technology and understanding of things. And as we move further into the planetary activation cycle, humanity will repeat the mistakes of who and what they are on a higher level inside this human form, because that's what happens when the enclosure begins to break down. Then their higher level infected level will begin to descend into their human form, because that's what the old world order technology was all about. It was about keeping up the strength of the physical form, cloaking it with the emotional field and the mental field, which of course to begin with were part of the processes of ensuring that they would deal with their distorted types of energies and dream state and everything that we are part of later on hijacked and taken over by the hijackers, and then turned into imprisonment tools, enslavement tools, and other souls came in and were dumped here that did not belong here, or other races. They were stripped of their physical form, as you know from understanding the old Stellar Souls book, stripped of their physical form, put into this form, and their templates were scattered amongst the different groups here. And that's the factions. And that is why people are being owned by these different factions, because they were taken as prisoners of war in a different system, dumped here, divided amongst these factions. And these factions work together to prevent us from gathering our template pieces and put it back together by activating our radiation field and our vibration field. Because as you learn to vibrate on the correct timelines, your genetics begins to activate. And as you learn to work with the radiation energies, you'll learn to what to keep and what to put into transmutation and what to get rid of. And that is the bridging point into gathering our template, scattered template structure. So I know that when I talk about the original template sciences and the template science courses, I there talk as if we have that intact upper template level. Most of us haven't, and what is left is often of a variety which is really not worth much, which is also why when in 2020, when the Dracos pulled out, the councils came in and from the progressive worlds and removed what was left of the upper top level of the templates and original genetics that were connected to the progressive worlds. And whatever's left is what we kind of have in storage from the restoration program, as well as the reverse programs, as well as the hijacker program and what have you. So we have a lot of cleaning work to do, which is why it's enormously important that we don't see ourselves in a too positive light. We need to test who and what we are continuously, all the time, up against the principles, up against the core knowledge of what we know to be the true way of existing as a solar system human or a solar rishi humanoid. And that again goes into the ability to work with reality as it really is, to see ourselves as we really are and see others in the same light of clarity. And that is where we'll continue the next podcast. Thank you.